Zonta International once again presents the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories webinar series, and I welcome you to my conversation with Isata Kabia, the founder and director of Voice of Women Africa and the CEO of AFRiLOSOPHY, and a former Member of Parliament and Minister in the Government of Sierra Leone. I'm Lynn Foley, and I'm truly privileged to speak with the remarkable women who are so generous with their stories and their time. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay that respect to any First Nations people present. Zonta International is a leading global organisation working together to build a better world for women and girls. So Isata, I warmly welcome you to our conversation today. And as we begin, I wish to give our audience a short introduction to you and your achievement. Isata is the founding director of the Voice of Women Africa, as I said a moment ago, a network of female leaders serving to amplify women's voices and inspire collective action. Voice of Women Africa aims to increase women's participation in politics and mentoring for girls. In 2015, she founded and established AFRiLOSOPHY, a social enterprise focused on skills provision and job creation. Most recently, Isata served as a Government Minister of Social Welfare, Gender and Children Affairs in 2018 and as a Minister of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in 2016. She has also represented Sierra Leone in the Pan-African Parliament. She holds an honours degree in biochemistry, an MBA in global business and impact entrepreneurship. Isata, when I met you recently, I realised that your life so far has taken you from your home country of Sierra Leone to many parts of the world. I'd like to start our conversation with where and how your story began and ask you to describe some of your personal and career achievements so far.
Yes, I have been around the world and I feel privileged for that because there are lots of opportunities that came about because I was able to get an education in many different parts of the world. But the foundation of my education started in Sierra Leone, and I am very proud of that as well, because I remember when I first moved from Sierra Leone to London, my teacher, the first parent-teacher evening when my mother went in to see my teacher, he told her, oh, she's beating them in everything, including English, and I remember that sentence, and I'm still proud of that because it reminds me of the kind of education I was able to get, the kind of foundation I was able to get from home. And, but of course, living in England and then ultimately in America, before I moved back home in 2008, you get more than the education in the classroom. There's a formal education, but there's also the exposure to the experiences. So imagine somebody who's been educated in my town in Sierra Leone now, who doesn't have access to the internet, doesn't have access to innovation, and doesn't have access to that kind of unlimited information. So the location of the education is much more than the experience you get in the classroom. It's also about your lived experience, and I'm grateful for that.
So your university study was in the area of biochemistry, and I know you didn't do that in Sierra Leone. I believe you undertook that in London, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in your early career based on that biochemistry degree in that broad cosmetics area and how this still forms part of your work, because you will recall I'm fascinated by the fact that you have this biochemistry background and working, if you like, in the broader cosmetics space, and yet have so many achievements related to your own country and education and your time as an elected member of your parliament. So please tell us that story, because I think it's a fabulous story.
It sounds like magic. But a lot of people meet me and I talk about Sierra Leone and development and women's opportunities and gender equality, and they assume I'm a social scientist, and then they ask me, what did you study? And I say biochemistry, and there's like a double take. So I always say biochemistry used to pay the bills, but it was not really my interest, and talking about innovation, talking about the internet, I remember when I first came on vacation as a 16-year-old to Sierra Leone, and I fell in love with my country. At 16 years old, I felt like I found my life mission. And I started, I was very interested in my primary school at the time, and I was helping them with chalks and pens and pencils and books and supporting children that are going there. And if I had access to the internet at that age, if we had the kind of world we have now, I would have become some kind of an Africa specialist. I would have changed my major when I went to college, So for the longest time, since I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a pediatrician. I wanted to be a medical doctor, and I wanted to work with children because I love children. And at 18, I decided I didn't want to go to 7-year medical school. I'm just going to do science. And I decided on biochemistry. And I fell on biochemistry, knowing that really it was no longer my passion, but lack of imagination. I didn't know what else and how else to fit in, what I'd recently discovered about my love of Africa in general and Sierra Leone in particular. And I didn't know how to turn that into a study major. I didn't know how to turn that into a career. So I went on to study biochemistry. And the thing is, we laugh, as children, either of African parents born somewhere else or who've grown up somewhere else. We laugh about our parents' obsession with doctoring and lawyering and those kind of steady jobs and steady careers. So if you come up to your African parents and say, I want to be an artist, I'm like, artist, what is that? What does that mean? So it was really like, you almost also don't have an option, science, yes, you're going to be a scientist, brilliant. So I studied biochemistry. I moved to the United States soon after that, and being in the New Jersey area, which is really a great manufacturing environment. So you have so many companies there, from Colgate, Palmolive to Johnson & Johnson, and the L'Oreal and Lancome Group. And I ended up working for the L'Oreal Group as an assistant in the microbiology lab initially, and ultimately in the color lab, which means I get to approve all those beautiful eyeshadows and lipsticks and match them. And then I worked as an R&D manager in the US for a German company called Schwann Cosmetics. And Schwann Cosmetics does a lot of private label. So they will make your Lancome pencils and your Christian Dior lip liners and eyeliners, but you hardly ever see Schwann on a product, so they make for other people. So the biochemistry ultimately did become, very handy. It paid the bills. But even within my adult life in the United States, I was very much involved in Sierra Leonean affairs. This would be the period between like 1995 to 2008 when I, ultimately moved back to Sierra Leone. But it was a time during this late 90s and early 2000 when the civil conflict was ravaging Sierra Leone. And as Sierra Leoneans outside of Sierra Leone, we were trying to do whatever we could to assist, to support, and to help people who are going through really difficult times. And in 1998, I started an organization called African Women of Substance. And it was an organization of young people. We were all in our 20s, late 20s. And we wanted to do something, just do something. So we landed, for our particular mission, we landed on helping children back home. So we were ultimately in support of 2 orphanages in Freetown. We used to put on beauty pageants in the New Jersey and Washington area and raise funds and send some supplies back home, or pay school fees, or support orphanages, for feeding. So we called our brand of pageants edutainment. So it was both about entertaining, but also educating people about the war that was going on at the time, and also trying to do good with the funds we're trying to raise. As African Women of Substance, we were also involved in the efforts to lobby at the White House to advocate for more assistance, more support to end the war here, and also to raise awareness about what was going on so that we can bring more people on board. And it was a fascinating time, being both the initial idea to say, hey, I want to do this. I find that I'm an organizer in some sense when there's so much passion involved, when there's something that needs to be done. And other than that, I'm usually just a very quiet, private person, you know, very low
So
key. So kind of
so
like
you're
this.
quiet and private, and then you, if you like, jump out of your box when the passion about your country and your continent happens, obviously. When you returned home to Sierra Leone in 2008, what was the main influence that took you there? What was the main influence, I guess, that took you back to Sierra Leone after so many years, both in London and then in the States?
Yeah, so my when I talk about my life story, there are like maybe 3 or 4 really major inflection points. And one of them was that 16-year-old vacation back in Sierra Leone for the first time. And I truly, truly fell in love with a country. And if I had my way, I would never have gone back to London, and that's the truth. So if they'd allowed me, if there was any kind of leeway, I would have stayed on in Sierra Leone because I didn't want to go back. I literally did not want to go back. So having gone back, thank God, and finding myself graduating from college and then working in the United States, there was always this passion that I wanted to ultimately move back to Sierra Leone, but it was about the timing. So like I said, in the late 90s, the war, was on, and there was just no possibility of coming home. So I spent all of that time living in the States, working in the States, and gaining like fabulously important skills, I must add. So in 2008, I was having a really difficult time. It wasn't about being excited and being the right time. It was kind of the right time for the wrong reasons. I lost my mother in 2006. I was having a really difficult time. And my grandmother, who was still living in Sierra Leone at the time, I felt like she must be going through twice as much pain as I am, because my mother was her everything. My grandmother was the reason I first came back home at 16 years old, because I wanted to see her after so many years. And in 2008, my grandmother was the reason I moved back home. I figured she'll be able to support me through my difficult time, and I'll be able to support her. And so I talk about my grandmother as my North Star. She passed away finally 3 years ago, but she has been the inspiration for me finding Sierra Leone in the first place and deciding to move back in 2008. In 2008, there was also a new government in place. So there was an election in 2007. And I think the excitement among Sierra Leoneans at that time was palpable. Conversely, I decided that when I moved back home, I would not work with governments because I didn't see myself as a political person or public person. But I thought, having started an organization in New Jersey that had done so much great work, I'll be able to, run a business here and also possibly start my own community-based organization to continue the work we had done with children and in the education field in particular. So I never imagined a life in government or near government. And I also kind of took a distinct decision to make that not my ambition. So it's quite fascinating that, in 14 years back in Sierra Leone now, I didn't just work with government, I became government, running for elected office and ultimately being a minister of government in Sierra Leone.
Yes, it's interesting how that the tables were turned on you, isn't it? I'm not going to do that, and then there you were, being elected and having a powerful influence in your own country.
Yeah.
Currently, now that your time in government has passed, like you were there for a number of years, currently you're truly immersed in organisations focused on supporting women and girls in various ways. And when you were the minister for 2 different portfolios, you also had the opportunity to make a significant difference in the constituency that you were elected in. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us about how you approached that work and the difference you believe you made and you continue to make now through community organisations, but originally through your political influence.
Yeah, and I call myself the accidental politician, also acknowledging that there are really no accidents. I'm sure it's not a coincidence that I was able to find Sierra Leone at 16 and grow so much passion for doing good in this country. And I felt like I approached my work in government, both as in the legislature and in the executive branch, as an activist. So the work I had done outside of government continued, but in a way that with the legitimacy of being appointed, with the legitimacy of being elected in my constituency, I felt like I had the power to do more. I had the responsibility to do more. So for me, it was a continuation of the work I'd started when I was very young. And I remember when I went to Parliament, you're going to be placed in 3 or 4 different committees as a parliamentarian. And I specifically requested education and health committee. And then, you know, if there was 1 more or 2 more, you can put me where you want, but those ones were my own passion. Those were the areas I wanted to work in. So I was in the education committee and in the health committee, and also in minerals and mines, because we had a company at the time that was working on iron ore mining in my constituency. So that made sense. And when I went into the executive branch and I was appointed foreign minister, I was quite reluctant, actually, because I felt like I had plans for my constituency. I felt like I was able to design ways to bring community into development and give them a greater role and showcase their responsibility, as opposed to passively waiting on to see what governments will do, to say, hey, this is your role in this equation and you have a great responsibility, and show them the kind of work we could do together. And without having traction, I didn't want to leave that at an idea stage. I wanted to show some results, some impact, and then force anybody who comes along to be able to continue that. So I was really reluctant to be appointed a minister of government when I think the work I'd chosen to do in my constituency still existed. But when I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I really enjoyed that role. I ended up really enjoying that role more than I thought, because I saw myself as a person placed in an opportunity to access opportunities for Sierra Leone. And in the foreign ministry, we're bringing opportunities to water resources, to energy, to social welfare, and all the different ministries involved. And I felt like a natural in that role. I felt proud being the face of Sierra Leone internationally. I felt it was a privilege and an honor. You know, imagine being a child and coming here and with my own little money trying to support schools and trying to support hospitals, and then being placed in a position where you actually were a decision maker. You know, it was an honor and a privilege, and I never imagined that. And at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, being in touch with the diplomatic community and showcasing Sierra Leone, a proud Sierra Leone, a Sierra Leone which has, since many, many years, has also given so much to Africa, and not taking a stance of, you know, poor me or poor us, and we're in need. Yes, we're in need now, but we've given so much to the world as a very small country. And I feel very proud of that. And I was able to showcase that. And then when I went back to social welfare as the minister in charge, I felt like I was the member of parliament for the whole of Sierra Leone. So it felt like being responsible for the kinds of vulnerable communities that I'd so much enjoyed working with, and being able to make decisions to change the narrative for people that were physically challenged and aged and children, and ultimately trying to put to structure a way to support and assist these communities in social welfare without making them dependent. So a way to empower communities, to empower women to say, hey, this is what you can do. And this is how you can grow with government support, as opposed to government perpetually supporting communities. So that's why I say I approached my work within the executive branch as an activist, continuing the work of empowering people, in accompanying people. You know, I love that word. So Jacqueline Novogratz of Acumen talks about accompaniment. And I always had such a hard time talking about empowerment because I don't see people as passive and dependent. I see them as powerful. And it's for us to create the space for them to show that power, especially with women, you know, to create the space for them to have agency to amplify their voices and showcase the work, the tremendous work that people were doing already in communities, but in a way that they can register impact.
And is it also about providing an opportunity for women in particular to grow a skill set, to learn new skills and new capabilities? And it might be in entrepreneurship so they can manage a small business or whatever they desire to do, and can also gain that voice to also take roles in community organisations and potentially in government in the future. I'm assuming from what I've heard from you that it is very much about that growing skills.
Yes, yes. So I see my 8-year-old self, you know, that was the age I ultimately left Sierra Leone. I see my 8-year-old self in all the children I meet. So with girls in particular, I wanted to make sure they were able to access as much education as possible. And when I was working in my constituency and I saw how much girls are still left behind, not based on our laws, but based on the culture. So even though our law gives equal access for education to boys and girls, the structural barriers we talk about that prevent women to move into leadership start very early. There's structural barriers for girls to gain access to that education. And wanting to improve and increase the women's leadership space, I realized if girls are not educated in 20, 30, 40 years, we will still be talking about the dearth of women that are not available to take up leadership roles. So to be able to create that pipeline of educated, qualified, experienced, and confident women, we have to start early. So I wanted to support girls' education in my constituency. I was giving out scholarships. Education in primary school was practically free under a government. There was a minimal payment. But when you transition from primary to secondary school, then you have to start paying fees. And if there's limited amount of financing in the homes, they're going to choose to send the boy to school and keep the girl at home. So girls are still affected. So we supported scholarship for girls who were performing very well in the transition exam from primary to secondary and giving them scholarships to continue their education. And then I figured if I want to help girls stay in school longer, their mothers have to have the kind of income that would make that possible. If women have money, their girls are more likely to be educated. So living in a mining community, as I explained earlier, where men were being employed in a mining company more than women, in 2013, we experienced a lot of social issues. You know, when you have men with money and women without, we had a large number of girls dropping out of school because of early pregnancy. You know, it just created a really bad social impact on us. And we figured that if we help women to create and run sustainable businesses, increase their revenues, then they'll be able to help their daughters stay in school. So AFRiLOSOPHY was born out of this idea of an approach, a women-centered approach to development, about making sure women had access to financing, and which ultimately can't be separated from the leadership question, because when they are able to contribute anything in the home, then their voices are valued, their voices are respected. And once women are able to find their voices in the home, they're more likely to get involved in community affairs. And ultimately, these are the people then who will ask and say, well, you know, maybe I want to run to be a councillor, or I want to run to be a member of parliament. And this thread of empowerment in terms of education, experience, and financing is what we do within the space of AFRiLOSOPHY and Voice of Women Africa.
Excellent, and it's just such powerful work, and I understand it still will take quite some time to take it where you want it to be, but the steps are happening, and with the support of yourself and other people in your country and from outside your country, it should keep increasing. A slight change of direction now. You did talk about your grandmother very strongly in a very positive way. So I'm wondering, in your answer to this question, if it might be your grandmother or somebody else, Who's been your most powerful role model or mentor? And what have you
Yeah,
learned from that person?
it has to be her. um, she was my everything. And my grandmother never went to school. My grandmother never went to school. So the work I'm doing is in honor of her as well. Her name is Adama. And the every girl is Adama. And my grandmother was very, very intelligent. You would not encounter, you would not meet with her for a minute and not realize how special her brain was. And I just found it fascinating. So when I was younger, I heard stories that her father, my great grandfather, came to the city because we're from the north, a little bit outside of Freetown, but he came to the city when she was still a little bit young. And they said he met women working in offices in Freetown and he cried. And he says he wished he'd sent Adama to school. So to prevent those tears going forward from parents who have regrets, or to prevent the limitation of excluding powerful contributions from our society, we have to send every child to school, not just every girl, but every child, and make sure they have a limitless choice of what they can do and what they can contribute. If we continue to eliminate 50% of our population from development, it's like a country, it's like a bird trying to fly with one wing, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So my grandmother taught me the importance of valuing everybody. So I don't value people based on their education level. I value people based on what they want to do. And it's not about English. You know, we have a way here of measuring intelligence according to the level of English you have. We have people who can't speak English who are very smart. So literacy and intelligence is not the same thing. So when I work in these communities now, training women to run their small businesses and grow them into something sustainable, that is always in the front of my mind. The fact that they have something to contribute, they have something to teach me. I'm not going in there to teach, we're learning together. And people who are most affected by these hardships are able to contribute the most to developing comprehensive solutions. And we have to make that the foundation of our policies in government. We have to make that the ideology within our work as activists and NGOs. We have to respect, we have to listen to the people we're trying to help, because it's not us coming in and saying, this is what you should do. It's about us coming and asking, how do we help you? And they have ideas, they have the knowledge, and we have to make sure we create the space for them to have a voice within the solutions. So my grandmother, I think, has that impact on me, and every woman I meet, every woman I work with, I realize the value of what they bring to the table. Because poverty is, I say poverty is just a location. It's not who you are, it's where you are right now. And it doesn't and it shouldn't be different to how people deal with you based on the amount of education you have or the amount of money you have.
Mind you, education is the gateway, isn't it? Education is the gateway to a different life or a better life, and not having to have that distinction that you speak of. But I agree with you, intelligence is intelligence and intellect is intellect. It doesn't rely on education necessarily.
Yeah.
Can I ask you now about, I know that in our initial discussions that you faced some of life's big challenges from a very early age throughout parts of your life. I wonder how you were able to recover from or work your way through some of these, and what or whom did you rely on?
Yeah, so when I look around Sierra Leone and I see the daily realities of so many people, I don't see my difficulties as hardships. I see them as life happening. You know, so you're going to lose loved ones, you're going to face challenges. But when your environment doesn't even provide you the opportunity to solve your problems, and you have to rely on somebody else, you know, that's a different scenario altogether. As you said, when you have access to education and you can find a job and look after yourself, it's different than when you don't have that formal education and you don't have the chance to print a CV and walk into an office and say, do you have an opportunity that I can contribute to? So for me, I look to that, and that makes it possible for me to overcome, because I know in the end, as long as I'm determined and I'm still alive, you know, as long as I'm determined to take the next step, there are systems around me that will support that. So I'm trying to create similar systems around people who may not otherwise have that chance. At AFRiLOSOPHY, the women we work with, we're trying to make them into employers and not employees. You know, you can't, like I said, print a CV and walk into an office for an opportunity. But if you start a business that's sustainable, then you become not the only employer, not the only employee, and you need to look for another employee. So now that person that doesn't have access to formal education becomes a job creator. So you can create jobs and be a productive, you know, member of society as opposed to a dependent one. So we do training where we create employers at our society, at our organization. And we do that with people who don't have a formal education and who don't have access to that anymore. But the kind of education we give them is relevant education. You know, if you can produce, so we do the small scale manufacturing training, and then they can process, harvest from the farm and take it to market, or they can make shoes, or they can make bags, or they can make jewelry, and use their hands, use their talent to earn a living. I don't feel as if I've been through hardships. You know, I've had difficult periods in my life, but I think living in an environment in the UK, in the United States, where you have systems of support around you, it enables you to overcome, and then it enables you to become a teacher. So if I hadn't had those downtimes, I may not be the kind of leader that I am now. But when you have the experience that you're trying to help people overcome, it really informs how. It informs how you approach it, and informs how you develop those solutions. So I have so much respect, like I said, for the women I work with, because in the end, when you're down, it doesn't mean that you don't know what you want to do, or you don't have the brain power to do it, but you just need somebody to come along and say, hey, let's go together, you know.
Walk beside those people and help them through it. So a perfect entry into the next question for me is, how would you describe your leadership powers or gifts? What do you think they are? And how did you develop your skills as a leader? What are the powers and gifts, then how did you develop?
Yeah, so I used to be a very, very quiet child. And those who knew me in those days then saw me in the Parliament of Sierra Leone, you know, and even when I was going through the election before I got elected, they'll call me and they ask, like, are you okay? Did you bump your head somewhere? You know, what is happening? So as women, I always say you have to get angry enough, you have to get passionate enough, and then nothing can stop you. So I had the fear, great fear of public speaking. I couldn't speak in front of two people, and now I teach public speaking. So everything I'm trying to do in my life, I've lived through, I've overcome, and it makes me a better teacher. It makes me a better teacher because of that. And my strength, I believe, is empathy. And empathy is something I used to run away from, because empathy for us at a time signified weakness and not strength. And it's my greatest strength, because if you're able to feel what somebody's feeling enough to be moved into action, I think that's what everybody who's trying to make change in this world should be equipped with. Because I was very quiet, it made me a very great listener, and I couldn't share my thoughts with too many people, but I could listen to them. And I hid behind the cover of listening so that I would not have to talk. I would not have to share. But it developed the skill that I think it's the number one skill you need when you're dealing with multiple challenges and many different kinds of people. How do you listen to those diverse voices? How do you bring all of their concerns or their hopes and their dreams to the table? How do you practice inclusion if you're not listening? So listening, which I learned, by default because I was a quiet child, has become my greatest strength. And in the spaces I work in now with women, I believe that the kinds of leadership that resonates with the world is a kind of leadership that is generally, we find in women.
So was it the anger and the passion that helped you develop that voice, because you were moving from being a quiet child and a quiet adult for some of that time? And you talked about anger and passion. Did that help you find your voice and claim your space and have an opinion, do you think? Or was it something else?
It was definitely the anger and passion. So you have all of these ideas bubbling inside you, and you have these thoughts and you want to take action. And as a small person, it's like, how do you do that if you don't build support and partnerships? And to do that, you have to explain yourself to people and then find like minds. So my first organization in New Jersey, African Women of Substance, was born out of that. I wanted to do something for my country. My country was in, my Sierra Leone was going through a war. My Sierra Leone, people were dying, and I can't stand by and do nothing. So how do you action that passion? How do you turn that, that passion into action? So I called a few other young women at the time and said, hey, this is the idea. What do you think? And, a few of them said yes, and we got started. But even with that, because I told you, I'm great at organizing. And I always tell people, no, I like to lead from the back. I like to lead from the back. And that's because I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be heard. So when we were putting on our beauty pageants, I'd have all the ideas and we'll do all the organizing. And then on the night, I'll say, okay, one of you has to present. One of you has to present. And there were men in New Jersey, older men who were in theater, who were acting and, helping younger Sierra Leoneans as well to come together and do some work, who said to me, you have something to say and the world needs to hear it. Nobody's going to do this. You're going to do this. And I took the mic for the first occasion and I almost died.
Did you find that really caused your confidence to grow, or your self-belief? Because often the reluctance to have a voice or the reluctance to speak out is based in self-confidence and self-belief. So it sounds to me like while you were pushed to do it, you were also encouraged by the men around you to say, no, you have something important to say. Is that a fair summary of what?
Absolutely. Confidence and self-belief, you hit it on the head. And when I talk about the work I do and how it resonates with me, I talk about the women in my constituency, in my community, and women in Sierra Leone. We talk about building a cadre of women who believe in themselves and in each other, because I know the difference between self-belief and confidence. I know the difference. And the men in my community in New Jersey were able to do that for me. They didn't just kind of push you and let you go. They were there for me every step of the way. And it gets easier. That's what public speaking is. It's just about practice. And the first time, like I said, I almost died on stage. And the second time I was like, okay, I'm not dying. I'm just a little bit sick. And then it goes on like that. So when those people who knew me at a very young age then saw me in the Parliament of Sierra Leone, like burning the place down every day because of what's going on, the difference between the two Isatas, was amazing to see. And for me, I know the progression, obviously, from one stage to the other. And I know it's just about putting one foot in front of the other and having somebody to say, I got you. And really, I go back to that place in New Jersey when I first had the confidence to call a few women together, and then was given the support to be on the front line as opposed to in the background, by people in my community who thought the work I was doing was important, and, and they were there to support me. And if that hadn't happened, Parliament would not have been possible.
No, because you had to grow your voice to be able to go forward and do
otherwise I would have
been,
otherwise I would have been one of those parliamentarians, that sits there for 5 years and doesn't say anything.
That's right. So what's the personal achievement of which you're most proud? Your personal and professional achievement where you go, wow, that's what I really am pleased about.
Running for office, taking that decision, just a decision to say yes. Women, we will say no 1,000 times when somebody presents us with an opportunity that puts us in the limelight, that puts us in public space. We will say no 1,000 times. So any woman that that has the qualities to make a difference, ask her and ask her again, and then ask her again. That ultimate decision, after the women came to me 3 times and I ultimately said yes, because when I visited the areas in my constituency and I saw the kind of work that needed to do, and I knew that I had the heart to do that work, I realized the hero you've been waiting for is you. But taking that decision brought about everything else. So for me, I was most proud of myself for putting myself out there in service of other people, regardless of how big the fear was for me at the time.
And fueled by passion and at times anger. So the fuel was the passion and maybe anger from time to time. And that's what I've heard. Can I move? We've talked a lot in the time we've been together, and we'll move to a close shortly, about gender equality, and about the inclusion of people from diverse cultural backgrounds in all aspects of society. I'm wondering if you've got any further comments or views you'd like to share with me about that path to gender equality, where we know from the World Economic Forum and other sources that it's more than a century away before we can expect global gender parity.
Yeah.
Have you got any further thoughts? We've pursued it fairly strongly, but any further thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. At the rate at which we're going, as you say, it's going to take us more than another 100 years to get to where we need to get to. And the world doesn't have 100 years. The world will be losing an opportunity to move the globe in the right direction if we continue exclusion, if we continue to disenfranchise girls in education, and if we continue the structural barriers we have within certain cultures about the spaces that women should or can occupy. So this, the gendered division of labor and the imagined differences that should exclude women from places of power. So when we talk about politics, it's still about men, and women are not allowed. And in our culture, we will find women in the back of the house cooking in the kitchen and men in the front discussing politics. So we moving into political spaces are seen very much as intruders. And we're here to say that we are not trying to exclude men. It's not about that exchange. It's about working side by side with men to ensure that the difference that we bring to the table, the difference of our own leadership, is what's missing right now. And that's what the world needs. The world needs the softness of leadership that can actually take us to a place where we care about what happens, not just in our neighborhood, but 10,000 miles across the world. Because as we see, what happens 10,000, 100,000 miles away actually affects what happens in your neighborhood. So the kind of borderless leadership which resonates with women is what the world needs right now. And that is why it is so vital that we don't take this as something that we have time on. We don't have time on it. And it should be something we should be acting on collectively and in urgency.
And it's not either or, it's together. And I know I always say, and I know you've said it to me, at the moment, the world is missing out on up to 50% of intellect, power, voice that will help us get there much more quickly. I agree with it. So let's hope we can continue to make a difference and do it much more quickly. One of the things that I've learnt about great leaders, of which you are one, is they have a lot of things they do when they have some spare time. They might read or listen or watch something, or they have other activities they engage in that brings a little bit of balance to that professional life. I wonder what sorts of things you do when you have that little bit of spare time, or you're seeking to have some balance in your life.
Well, I really like to say, like, oh, I listen to music all day, because there are days when I imagine, like, oh, if I have some time, I'll just have, you know, the music blasting around the house and just kind of retreat into myself. I would love to do that. I do like to do that, but I don't get as much opportunity to. But I read a lot, because I've done that since I was very young. And I remember my mother would have to come and turn the lights off 3 or 4 times in the middle of the night. And I just wait till it was quiet, and then I'd turn it back on. And then I'd struggle to wake up in the morning, because I've been up all night trying to finish a book that is so exciting. So moving into those different worlds and that escapism and living these adventures, that's where my love of reading started. But I have learned so much from books, and I continue to learn so much from books. So I read for pleasure, but I also read to learn, and I continue that despite not being in school, so, and there's so much opportunity to learn so much on the internet now, and still holding a physical book in my hand is such a pleasure. I fell in love with Paulo Coelho like a year before I moved back in 2007. A friend of mine from New Jersey gifted me the book The Alchemist.
Yes.
And I have given that to more than a dozen people as gifts in return. And I've read it more than a dozen times. It spoke to my heart. It gave me the push that I needed, to find my own treasure. And it was like, oh my goodness, this was so timely, at a time when people were asking me, you want to move back home? Why? There's no light, there's no water, and they would highlight all of the hardships. And I would tell them, oh no, this has been my dream since I was 16. I just want to live in Sierra Leone, and I love Sierra Leone, and I want to work in Sierra Leone. And then I stopped explaining. After I read that book, I stopped explaining. So when somebody asks me, why do you want to move back? I say, because I want to. Because ultimately, that's really what I was saying, because I want to. And those who are asking me maybe did not want to, and I couldn't transfer whatever I had. I couldn't give it to them. And thank God they couldn't give me, their own doubts. And it was a leap of faith. I didn't move home with a job. I just moved home knowing that this was the place I wanted to be and needed to be at the time. And recently I was reading a book written by several activists called A Roadmap to a Revolution. So there's the practical learning there about mobilizing and organizing at a time when, we're so critically in need of change and in need of raising the bar on gender equity. So yeah, there's also this practical learning about the work I'm doing, learning from women who've done great things, and it's really useful, but it's also fun to read.
That's right. We have to have things that are fun, and we have to do things that I think it's about balance and keeping us fresh, isn't it? Keeps us fresh for the work that we do. So moving to close our conversation today, it's so exciting. I could keep talking, but in moving to a close, what do you think might be next for you, Isata? Like the next uplift in the power of your voice? You have an incredibly powerful voice in your own country and across the world. So what's next, and how do you get that uplift?
Yeah, so for me now in this space, the most important work I'm doing is to get more women to vote and be voted for, and working on increasing women running for elective office is crucial at this point of our politics. Politics in Sierra Leone is scary. Generally, I think it's scary for women around the world who want to put themselves in a space where they're going to be, invariably insulted and excluded and marginalized or bullied. And we've seen the experience of that. So when people see what happens to other women, they're less likely to opt in. So women are permanently opting out and saying, okay, this is not for us. And I continue to say, this is for us. The more you feel that way, the more you're needed in this space so that you can change the space. And working towards that, training women in this electoral cycle in Sierra Leone, because we have national elections coming up in June 2023. So to be able to hopefully encourage and enable women to opt in and run for office, for me, is a really important time and really important work that I'm embarking right now. And that is not just to say it's an event or it's an activity. It's part of the process of change. And I realized how important that leadership voice is. So my visibility counts. And if we're able to increase the visibility for more women and amplify women's leadership and normalize women's leadership, then there will come a time when we will just have candidates and we don't need to see how many men are candidates and how many women are candidates, because we've built the right kind of culture that actually encourages all voices. And when I ran for office in 2012 and young women saw me, I looked a lot younger then too, so they thought I was probably their age, and the excitement was palpable. And I realized, oh my goodness, if my presence has given them the permission to dream bigger dreams, then I've won, regardless of whether I was able to get my party symbol for the ticket or not. So it's that kind of recognition that has kept me on the stage, knowing that my visibility makes a difference. And we want to increase that for women so that we can get children in Sierra Leone and other people in Sierra Leone to say, yes, that's the kind of leader I really respect, and that's the kind of leader I want to be. And I would support leadership that looks like that.
Fabulous. So that's all about young women and girls can't be what they cannot see. So absolutely. My final thoughts on that are that you are the sort of leader and woman that other people can look at and believe they can be through all of the work that you're doing and the powerful voice you have. Have you got a final thought to share with everyone?
Yeah, so I truly believe that leadership is about action. And I'm working now on details that I believe in, I truly believe in. And once you're able to find something that you believe in, just take action. Sometimes we wait until things are perfect. Sometimes we wait until we have enough time, enough money, enough. What I've realized about the kind of work we do is overwhelming. And we're talking here about 100 years timeline. So you're not going to even be alive to see the full impact of your work, but just do the work. And it's an old Jewish saying that says you're not responsible to finish the work, but you're responsible to start it. And that's what I live by. So I'm starting the work regardless of even whether I will succeed and regardless of whether I will see that success if it happens. So for me, remarkable women of the world, just start the work. It's not your job to finish it.
That's a very powerful thought. So Isata, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and sharing the powerful story that you have, and clearly a remarkable woman in your own right. Thank you for being a friend of Zonta and contributing to this conversation. It's been amazing. I have enjoyed every moment of it. And I wish you well as you continue to progress and do the amazing things that you're doing on behalf of everyone in your country. So to everyone watching us today, can I encourage you to share the information about remarkable women, powerful stories, and join me as the year progresses and we have more remarkable women on our list for 2023.